Okay, Sanbonani, welcome back. This is Power Talk with me, Dr Ndlozi, on Power 987. It is our feature, as indicated earlier, political schools. And we are marking the 70th anniversary of the Freedom Charter. I'm joined by a couple of our listeners here who I'd like to welcome warmly, and thank you very much for coming through. Some of them are serious people in society, and we are also joined by the veteran to be part of the audience, by the way, Obabu Mavus Msimang, and we'll see if he's provoked enough by our guests' input. You can obviously join the conversation on 0861987000. Send your voice notes 0833037093. And you can also watch. We are broadcasting live on our YouTube platform. And as I said, this is political schools. The Freedom Charter, which was passed in 1955, is turning exactly 70 years this year. The day is tomorrow, and we thought we should lay a foundation for a broader discussion about the inheritance that it truly carries. It was a very important conversation that involved over 3,000 people from all walks of life in Kliptown in 1955. I don't know if there's been anything of that nature since 1955, but certainly ours is now a democracy, and the other day there was 30 years of the setting up of the Constitutional Court, and I was wondering, how was it set up before the Constitution was adopted in 1996? But certainly it's a milestone, and I've got here, he's my brother and very close friend, and if I should gossip a bit with all of you, he won't like it, but you can offend a friend. Part of a certain demise of mine somewhere in my other life, Tembega was used as evidence that he was cited as a very important evidence. I don't think he's aware. But he's here, and he's certainly one of the most important intellectuals in our country before he's a lawyer. And he comes from a very rich history of student activism. He may be going around with gowns in courts there, but he was a very radical student activist in the University of Transkei. If you think Mcebo is radical, you should have seen him when he was young. And you all know him as an advocate. I've asked him today to come with the entire intellectual power to give us a quick lecture and then engage with him thereafter. You can call in. We've got an audience here. We've got a roving mic. 70 years of the Freedom Charter and constitutional supremacy, the heritage of all of that. I've got a podium, and I'm going to now allow him with a round of applause from all of us and invite him to come and give his input. Advocate Tembega Ncukaitobi.
Ndiyabulela Dr Ndlozi. Ezinye andizozingena because njengobusitsho andizazi. So xa into ungazazi funeka uzigcine phakathi kulaa nto uba awuzazi. Thank you very much, Dr. Ndlozi. I haven't actually publicly congratulated you. I think I've written on social media congratulating you on this impressive achievement of moving from Parliament to Power FM. You know, so you've now truly attained power. But from what I have been told, and I've also listened to snippets of your show, you're doing a great job empowering South Africans, not just with entertainment, but with education. I have a little bit of history in radio. Most people don't know, but I was a founder of the then University of Transkei Community Radio. We call it today UCR-FM. But our name for it, those of us who were in SASCO, was Unicora. We lost out to the Model Cs, who called it UCR-FM. But we debated at length about the vision of a community radio station when we were drafting the Constitution. Others saying it should primarily be about entertainment, but I was among those who argued that it should be about education. I still believe radio should be about education, first and foremost. Entertainment should be a secondary goal, but I don't know how they will make money, but I think you are playing that role of fulfilling our vision at UCR-FM in the exciting years of the mid-1990s when I was as a student leader in SASCO. You have invited me to speak about the topic of constitutional supremacy versus parliamentary supremacy, but in the context of the Freedom Charter, and to try and finish that in 20 minutes. So I'm going to start now. I just want to make sure that I don't do what my other colleagues do, which is to speak beyond my allocated time. Just to first reflect on the Freedom Charter itself, I've just written a piece for the Sowetan reflecting on the origins of the Freedom Charter. And the primary argument I've tried to make in that piece is to go back to the origins of the Charter. There is a lot of misconception that the Charter was a product of a few white communists who had infiltrated the ANC and took over the sort of intellectual product and output of the Charter. But what is little known is that the Charter is actually a product of Professor Z.K. Matthews, an African man. He conceived of the Charter in 1953. The Charter itself was adopted in 1955. But in 1953, Z.K. Matthews was the president of the ANC in the Cape. And the conference, the national conference, I think was held in September in Cradock. Cradock is now back in the news because of the inquest. And in the closing address, he stated there, I have the quote, he stated that the time had come for South Africa to convene a Congress of the People. The word Congress of the People came from that speech, in which a Freedom Charter, even the word Freedom Charter, came from that speech, in which a Freedom Charter would be discussed and adopted. Now, that Freedom Charter was intended to be a mechanism for a non-racial future of South Africa. So this is the actual quote. The actual quote says, this is the quote of the resolution, which says that the conference notes with interest the remarks of the president, and the president was Z.K. Matthews, on the need for the establishment, at the instance of the African National Congress and under its leadership, of a Congress of the People in South Africa, to draw up inter alia a Freedom Charter or Constitution embodying a vision of the future as we in Congress see it. Such a Congress of the People would serve to unite all democratic forces in South Africa, among all races into a front against the dangers of fascism. So this is Matthews speaking in 1953. That resolution was then taken up to the national ANC. It went to Chief Albert Luthuli, who was the then president of the ANC. Chief Luthuli then asked Z.K. Matthews for a memorandum that spells out how this Freedom Charter would be conceived. I have not seen the memorandum yet, but I've seen its summary in a book on the life of Z.K. prepared by Monica Wilson. Monica was a lecturer at Forte between 1944 and 1946 when Z.K. Matthews was a professor of anthropology. In other words, Monica reported to Z.K. Matthews. The summary of it was to try and set out a vision of how the government would be constituted. In other words, a government that would be based on the will of the people. It also would set out how the economy would be structured in a future South Africa. In other words, an economy that transcends the racial oligarchy of apartheid. It also set out how the land would be shared among those who work it. This was then presented to the Congress of Democrats and the Indian Congress as an idea. Most of it, except item 12, and item 12 really comprised of the mechanics of how the charter would function. Most of it was adopted by both the Congress of Democrats and the Natal and Transvaal Indian Congress. And so already they achieved the first goal of uniting all of the democratic forces against the racial oligarchy of the National Party. But of course, the ANC had this legacy of being an Africanist party, because whites had not been allowed to join the African National Congress for a long time. But they allowed whites to attend the Kliptown Conference. At the time, it was still called the Kliptown Conference in June of 1955, and they contributed. Z.K. Matthews himself did not attend the conference in June 1955. What had happened is that there was a student protest at Forte, and at the time he was the principal of the University of Forte. Matthews was an impressive figure himself. He had qualifications in law and anthropology, a BA, an LLB, an MA, and he had studied both at Yale University and at the London School of Economics and Political Science. And he also had an impressive list of students, Mangosuthu Buthelezi, Oliver Tambo, and Nelson Mandela. Those were some of his students. And Monica Wilson, in other words, talking about the inspiration of Matthews, also had an impressive list of students. Archie Mafeje was one of the students. Godfrey Piche was another. And so was Dumanokwe. We know Godfrey Piche and Dumanokwe subsequently became lawyers. Archie Mafeje became a well-renowned political scientist and anthropologist, ultimately meeting his demise when he had returned to South Africa and having obtained qualifications at Cambridge University. So we're talking about a man who had immense influence across. If you were alive in 1955, you would have been shocked to hear that the Freedom Charter was a communist document conceived and written by white communists that had infiltrated the intellectual thinking of the ANC. So today, in part, we have to pay homage to the real inspiration behind the Charter and the person who thought of it and designed it and laid the blueprint it's Professor Z.K. Matthews. He was a black man. There is a tendency, Dr. Ndlozi, in this country to abandon our intellectual legacy in favor of assigning it to Eurocentrism and whiteness. But it's actually false historically when you prowl through the records and you find that most of these ideas came from black people. Why would whites anyway design or conceive of these ideas? Because white racism suited them. And so the people that would have been behind notions of non-racialism naturally would have been African people. So that's the first thing I just wanted to highlight on a note of historical correction. I do want to come back to what I have been asked to speak about. The opening words of the Charter is "we the people," we the people. I mean, that phrase, I mean, even now, it's 70 years after the Charter, but every time you read it, it still gives you goosebumps, you know, in terms of the power of the words, because it thereafter says, "we declare for the world to know that no government can be legitimate unless it is based on the will of the people." This is such a powerful thing. You know. So the first important aspect of the Charter was the idea that the government would be based on the will of the people, and there would be no legitimate government unless it is based on the will of the people. Now you can imagine this was happening in 1955. And 1955 is only 7 years after D.F. Malan has catapulted the National Party into power. And they are implementing the most aggressive racial laws. Separate Amenities Act, 1951. The Voter Registration Act, 1953. So this is the period in which the apartheid racism is being translated from politics to law. And so the people that then convene in Kliptown are basically signing their own death warrants. This is because at the time, if you proclaimed the views of the Freedom Charter, you were assigning yourself to death. Right? And Z.K. Matthews was subsequently arrested in 1956, and he spent 135 years in detention, 35 days in detention. And he was acquitted in a famous trial called the Treason Trial, which we must distinguish from the Rivonia trial, where Mandela and others were found guilty. But he was acquitted in the Treason Trial, and he had been the star witness. And it's in that Treason Trial that he articulated the vision behind the Freedom Charter. And specifically, the charge was that the Freedom Charter was a communist document. And he said, "I'm actually shocked that you regard this as a communist document because it's an extension of the non-racial traditions of the ANC from the 1923 Bill of Rights to the 1943 African Claims document. It's an extension, it's more expansive than those documents, but it's an extension of what the ANC has stood for since 1912, when you did not believe that it was an illegal organization to be disbanded." Anyway, that testimony is really one of the best reads available, the testimony of Z.K. Matthews in the 1956 Treason Trial. Anyway, they were acquitted. Rumpf gave a judgment in which he said he could not find that the charter was either a communist document or that the drafters behind the charter had any desires to violently overthrow the state. All right, so what about constitutional supremacy and parliamentary supremacy? I need to first define the terms. When we talk about constitutional supremacy, we mean a state where the rule of law is supreme, where the Constitution is supreme, where the Bill of Rights is supreme, where there is an independent judiciary which has the final word on the meaning of the law in the country. So that is what we understand by constitutional supremacy. That is what our Constitution embodies. And incidentally, that is what the previous ANC documents, 1923 Bill of Rights, 1943 Africans' Claims, and the Charter itself always desired to have an independent judiciary that would interpret and apply the laws. By contrast, when we debate parliamentary supremacy, sometimes it's mistakenly called parliamentary sovereignty, but there is really nothing like sovereignty of parliament, because sovereign is the nation as a whole. It's really parliamentary supremacy that people are talking about. What we mean there is where parliament is supreme, where parliament can overturn a judgment of a court, where parliament's word on policy, on law is final, where parliament can change the constitution if it wishes, where the courts cannot question what parliament has decided, at least not on substantive ground, where the power of judicial review is limited only to procedure. So those are the two basic concepts that we are dealing with. So why does this distinction matter? I mean, firstly, just a point of history of these terms. There is a book by Professor Bernard Manning called Principles of Representative Government, published in 1997 by Cambridge University Press. What he does is a very useful study of this concept of sort of parliamentary democracy, because in a sense, what he tries to do is to unpack it and say, actually, it's a myth to talk of parliamentary democracy, because parliamentary representation is in conflict with democracy. So and the first thing he shows is that democracy itself functions on largely two models. The one model of democracy is a direct democracy model, and he traces that all the way from Athens in Greece. So you went to a constituency of the people, you made a decision by vote. Everyone took a decision by vote, and that was then the decision. Or if you couldn't make a decision by vote, you went to a lottery, and that was the decision. So that's like direct democracy. And then he says there is also a delegate model of democracy. So in other words, we don't make the decision ourselves. We send Dr. Ndlozi, go and make the decision on our behalf. But we tell him that he has no right to exercise independent judgment, right? He must do what we tell him. So he's like there on a robotic mission. That's a delegate model, right? Which is distinguishable from a direct democracy model where the decision is made by the people themselves. And then Professor Manning then makes this useful intervention for our purposes, which is that neither the delegate model nor the direct model are a reflection of today's conception of what we call democracy, right? Because now what we have is representative democracy. And it says that the way that emerged the real power is actually among the parliamentarians. So we elect them once, and then we see them again in 5 years' time. So that's a very useful way of understanding the sort of historical genesis of this. So when people tell us today that they want parliamentary supremacy, we ought to be taking a step back and asking, what actually do you want? You know, so concentration of power among the parliamentarians, or are you really talking about a form of democracy? In South Africa, the theoretical articulation of this has been made by Arthur Chaskalson in one of the judgments of the Constitutional Court. And then when he says that what happens in South Africa, we don't have a direct democratic system, we don't have a delegate model system. We have a combination of a Republican model and a party model. In other words, what the parliamentarians reflect is really a decision of the party. And the party is nominates our representatives to parliament. And the parliamentarians may be removed by the party, and the party achieves legitimacy because it obtains a vote through the manifesto that it presents to the public. Right? So where we are in South Africa, we then have a combination of a party system and a Republican model, right, in which parliamentarians have a real power, and that real power is not exercised in conjunction with us. Right? So they have a loose mandate. They don't have a direct mandate. They have a loose mandate to improve the lives of South Africans. But they don't have a direct mandate that on a particular topic, this is how they will vote. They just decide on themselves how to vote. And then the specific instructions are given by the party. Right? Now, we can then make, and I want to go to the third topic before I sit down. I think I'll probably spend a minute or so. We can then make a determination about whether in South Africa we prefer a parliamentary model in which all power vests among the parliamentarians, or whether we prefer a constitutional model in which there is limited power that is vested on the parliamentarians. I just want to make a few examples to illustrate the dangers of this so-called parliamentary model, which has become in vogue these days. Robert Sobukwe was detained in 1960, and he was sent to prison in September. That's when he lost his appeal, September 1960, because of Sharpeville. In April 1963, he should have been released. In fact, he was meant to be released, and he was in detention in Pretoria, at the Pretoria Central Prison. At night before his release, a document was prepared by the state legal advisor to the Minister of Justice to say that Sobukwe needs to be transferred from Pretoria Central to Robben Island. And then a law needs to be changed to allow the Minister of Justice to extend the period of detention of any detainee to a period that the minister may decide. And then on the evening of the 3rd of April 1963, they transferred Sobukwe to Robben Island. And then in the morning of the 4th of April, they announced publicly that his detention had been extended on the powers vested in the minister. But that detention had to be presented to Parliament for extension. And they also wrote in that law that there is no court that has the power to question the decision of Parliament and the minister. That was called an ouster provision, which then meant that Sobukwe could not go to court and challenge the unfairness of the detention. That's one example of an absolute parliamentary system. The second one is the Terrorism Act. It's the so-called Suppression of Terrorism Act. Steve Biko was detained in 1976 and detained again in 1977 before they murdered him. The provisions under which he was detained were the Terrorism Act. It contains Section 6, subsection 1. And Section 6, subsection 1 said that no court could inquire into the reasons for the detention of a detainee that was detained under the Terrorism Act. Right? So which meant that they could detain him, keep him in detention for 90 days, interrogate him, assault him, and torture him, and that no judge could enter into the space of the detention. That again was an illustration of how a parliamentary system works. So if we want the Bill of Rights to be protected, it's quite clear to me which system we should be preferring in South Africa. And it's clear that those people that are agitating for parliamentary systems are actually being mischievous. Thank you.
If you've just joined us, this is Power Talk with me, Dr Ndlozi, and the input we've just received is from Advocate Thembeka Ngcukaitobi, and we essentially are having a feature here on the talk, on Power Talk, which we call Political School, in light of the 70 years of the Freedom Charter. And we are asking the question of constitutional supremacy versus parliamentary supremacy. Between now and 1100 hours, I'm going to try and interrogate a little bit of what the advocate has put for us. And then from 1100 hours to 1200 hours, we'll take calls, we'll take inputs from the House. There's lots of lawyers in the House today, and we'll also take people from who are coming through voice notes. I think it's better if you hold this mic from a point of view of audibility. What you did for us, and I thank you deeply, is to basically firstly defend the African intellectual integrity. I must say that over the years we do this Freedom Charter thing, and this point is often left on its own. And I think it's mischievous because for some of us who have got left leanings, we leave it because we are scared the ANC might forget, you know, the National Democratic Revolutionary agenda. But it is true. ZK Matthews is important. The second thing you do for us is to go back to the ANC's ideas from 1912. That these ideas don't come when the whites are in the ANC or interacting with the ANC. That actually the integrity of Africa's self-sufficient intellectual thinking. And then you trace the constitutional supremacy ideas for us. What you don't do, which I'd like to ask you to do now, where does this parliamentary supremacy come from? Is it part of the heritage of these ideas as you trace them?
Yes, it is. Look, power was once concentrated in a single institution, whether that was the church. In other words, power in the modern state was once concentrated in a single institution. And that would either be the church or the monarch or the Tsar. Yes. It's the revolutions in England, in America, and in France that forced the dispersal of that power into either two branches or three branches. First, the revolution in England against King Charles with the establishment of the Westminster system. It installed the power, although it did not remove the monarch, it installed the power in Parliament, right? I mean, that was driven largely by the army, but power was therefore dispersed between Parliament and the monarch. But political power then resided with Parliament. Next, the revolution in France against Louis XIV. That led to the decapitation of the monarch, but then also a dispersal of the power, a total destruction of the monarchy there as an institution or a repository of power, but a division of power then between Parliament as a proxy for the people, because we must always remember Manning, because he's very skeptical about this idea of Parliament as the people. Yeah, Parliament is a proxy for the people, and the executive as basically the agents of Parliament. And then the last revolution, which is probably the most important for our discussion, the American Revolution, because it's in that revolution that the three branches of government were then established, and you see a lot of those writers in America fiercely defending the third branch, which is the judiciary, fiercely defending the third branch as a co-equal branch, which was the first time that it became co-equal. You know, although the idea of trias politica is a French idea, it was never practiced in France. It's practiced for the first time in America because Montesquieu was a French philosopher. It's practiced for the first time in America, where they have the three branches of government, which is the Congress, and the president in America is a branch of government, the president and then the judicial. So that's where they come from. They come from Europe.
Missed my question, advocate.
Yeah.
You traced the ideas
Yes.
of the Freedom Charter, of the Constitution, of the rule of law
Yeah.
in the African intellectual tradition
Oh, I
of
see.
our struggle.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
Is parliamentary supremacy traceable in the same way? So that we sort of located its historicity.
Yes.
ZK advances this point,
Yeah.
the proper memorandum. There are many intellectuals in the legal African intellectual discourse. Who are these Africans? And maybe they were there. Were they there? Did they say something at the Freedom Charter Conference?
No. Thank you. I've now got your point.
Yes.
The answer is no.
I get one
yeah.
Okay.
The answer is no. It's not traceable. It's obviously traceable now because it's sort of like fashionable as a political point of mobilization, but it has no basis in African intellectual history.
Therefore, in our struggle.
And therefore, in our struggle, yes.
Okay. The second question, and I'm hoping that there's a way in which we can all assist each other. So if there are people in the audience who have a different historical account, you are very free to disagree with the advocate. I promise you that now there are no intelligence reports here at Power. You will not be chucked out. The second thing that I'd like you to expand on is the last point. What precisely is mythical? You sort of give these important examples of people representing themselves, people represented by representatives, ultimately by political parties, and all of that. And then, but originally you had said it's sort of a myth, this thing of parliamentary supremacy. But you gave actual examples of the apartheid state where it's not a myth. The power of parliament over courts keeps Subukwe in prison for those many years in Robben Island. So I'm not sure in what way were you saying it is sort of a myth?
No. I was distinguishing between parliamentary sovereignty, which I say that that is a myth, between it and parliamentary supremacy. Parliamentary supremacy is a real thing. Parliament can exercise power. They detained Sobukwe, and they can change the constitution, they can remove the judges. That's what they did under apartheid. So I don't think that's a myth, it's a real thing. What is a myth is to talk of, in fact, it's more like perhaps not a myth, but it's a contradiction in terms. It's to talk of sovereignty and parliament, because there's no way parliament can ever be sovereign, because sovereignty belongs to the people as a whole.
So the sovereignty you were pointing to was in relation to claims that there could be a situation where parliament is sovereign, and underscoring the first sentence of the Freedom Charter.
Yes.
That the people.
We the people.
Yeah. Now, can you diagnose for us the current parliament? You were beginning to do that. You can leave me out a bit as an example.
Well, I thought you were
beginning to do that, and this is an important diagnosis because there's also conversations about the fact that national dialogue is futile since we have a parliament, that those people have a mandate. But you seem to gravitate to the point that the mandate is a bit more complicated. That's not a direct representation. It is actually complicated by a Republican version of political representation.
Look, that's a very important point to be, quite frankly. I suppose there are 2 points to be made. The one is that the model that is in the Constitution, right, is a Republican model, right, which is overlaid by a party system. And this is what Arthur Charles Colson was talking about, right? That if you want to know where do these people account, the people that we've elected, go to the party. Right.
They don't account to the people.
Yes, exactly. Directly, exactly. Yeah,
And that's the truth.
That's the truth, yeah. So if you want to know where they account, go to the people. Now, this was the point that we debated. I acted for an organization called the New Nation Movement in a judgment that came about 5 years ago to ask for a declaration of invalidity of the Electoral Act on the basis that it did not allow independence. Now, there was people coming from outside of political parties to contest elections, yes. But still, despite that victory, even in the last elections, the fact is that the vector of political power is still the political party.
I mean, most recently parties were changing lists.
Yeah.
Obviously, because some of us had to think of different routes.
Yeah.
Nobody, no constituency was consulted.
No.
Who should we replace Mbuiseni with?
Yes.
Or in the case of the ANC, who should we replace Ramaphosa with? When he gets elected as the president, there's a vacancy. The ANC is able to forward someone else. And the question didn't arise.
Yeah.
Such a name didn't even get published for public commentary.
Yes. Yes, I mean, Manin was right that the way the Republican model developed was that it was a struggle of the elites against democracy.
So it was a historic compromise.
Yes, it was a historic compromise.
In which case, I mean, in the US, there are actual constituencies.
Yes.
There's no party between a congressman or woman. People actually vote for the congressman, not for a Democrat.
Yes.
That they don't go and vote for a party per se.
Yes.
Except that Democrats will limit who gets available in their name in a specific constituency.
Yeah, and in the UK as well. The party is still an important vehicle, but at least there is a constituency model in which you have to be nominated by the constituency.
And in that case, you can be an independent.
Yes, you can be an independent. Yeah.
So our local state is completely Republican.
Not local, provincial and national.
So the municipal local government elections, since they are constituency-based.
No, they are both, remember,
there's a party representative.
There's a party and a constituency.
And a constituency. But in a sense, the councillors represent in society at the moment.
Exactly.
The most directly elected, the most representative of the people.
Precisely. Yeah. We are now aligned.
So what would happen if tomorrow we were to become a parliamentary supremacy? Why is that dangerous, since these people come out of a popular election?
It's the constraint of power, because the form of democracy we have right now is a form of checks and balances. The real issue is who's going to check and balance the power of parliament if you have an absolutist system. Because even though we argue, for those of us who are constitutionalists, even though we argue strongly for a rule of law based system in which the judiciary is supreme, the judiciary itself is not outside of constraints. It's constrained by the very same constitution that it enforces. But if the judges misconduct themselves, they can be removed by parliament. So the system checks each other out. But an absolutist parliament system means that a parliament that has no checks and balances.
Let's ask the most basic questions. Why should the judges decide? What about the judges? And oftentimes, until you get to the Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court, most of the time it's just one person, a listening, a Logish, Alexander, for an example. Just defend for us the idea of, because it has come under some huge challenge. Why? What is it about these individuals that they must decide the interpretation of the law, how long you go to prison for, and who was wrong and right in a dispute?
All right, look, I agree that...
And not the people.
Yeah, no, look, I agree that, you have to ask about the individual, but I think that that approach misses the point of asking about why should the institution of the judiciary decide. But we're going to talk about the individual right now, but let's first talk about why should the institution decide. So the first question is, what are they deciding, right? So most of the time, what they're deciding are enforcement of rights. So in other words, if I go out of power now and I get detained on the basis that what I've been saying here have been subversive, right, to the current government, I've been detained, and the question is, who's going to decide whether I spend the night in prison or whether I go home on bail? So the institution that decides that is usually an independent institution as opposed to parliament, right? You could do people's courts, but you don't have people's courts as opposed to parliament. So the first feature is independence, which is why the institution of the judiciary must make decisions in which we disagree on legal interpretation and decisions that affect rights. And most of those decisions are detention. You know, when you've been arrested, you want an independent person to decide whether the police are right in detaining you or not. Incidentally, most parliamentarians, if they have been unfairly detained, would not want their own colleagues to decide. They would rather go to an independent person.
A person, Kaucho, what defines this independence? Why are they independent? The courts.
Yes, well, they are independent because they are not meant to be influenced by political considerations. They are also not meant to be influenced by financial considerations. In other words, you know, often with politicians, with especially party politics, you know, they get funded, you know, to pursue particular objects, you know, and it's very difficult for them to pursue objects that are against the funders, you know, and whereas judges are not funded, you know, so they are independent from the funders.
They are not funded. They don't run a campaign to become a judge.
No, they don't. Yes, but they are also. I'm now talking about the second feature, which is sort of personal attributes. But they are also people of good moral standing, people of sound intellectual training, and people of sufficient experience trained in law. Those are the attributes that we look for when we appoint judges, when we recommend judges in the Judicial Services Commission. Now, of course, there will be one or two that do not fit those, but it's the combination of the necessity that the country requires of the institutional independence and the personal integrity of the individual. So we put more stringent requirements in the qualifications of a judge, I wouldn't say than we do for parliamentarians.
Oh, certainly.
but it's very stringent to become a judge. It's a tough thing.
And why? And I want you to defend or speak to us about this training question.
Well, I mean, I think on the training front, in order to become a judge, you should have, I mean, of course, there is a minimum qualification of law, you know, but you should know how the legal system works. You should know what a Bill of Rights is. You should know what the presumption of innocence is. You should know what a contract is. How does it differ from a delictual case? Because the public entrusts you to decide something that they themselves couldn't decide. And in order for us to give you a problem, if I'm fighting with my wife and we end up deciding to divorce, the person we go to is a judge. If two doctors are fighting about an experiment that has gone wrong, they go to a judge. If two engineers are fighting about the construction of a bridge, they go to a judge. So you have, you have this role that is so universal in society, where each profession and each sector goes to the judges to make a decision.
Okay. We are still on radio, so there is this small matter of paying the bills. I learned this language when I got here. We're going to go pay the bills and then go straight to the 1100 hours news and then continue the conversation with Advocate Dr Ndlozi. If you've just joined us, this is Power Talk with me, Dr Ndlozi, on Power 987. Let's go and pay the bills.
Shirumana Group and the Thabo Mbeki Foundation came together.
And the soul-stirring artistry of Simphiwe Dana. The pursuit of knowledge, quality peace, and prosperity has been the guiding force behind President Mbeki's remarkable career. This is the golden thread that runs through his life's work, shaping his leadership and inspiring the very mission of the foundation. I have to say that as a trustee, it is such a pleasure to have a living founder.
One of the trustees of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation is Ms. Gloria Sirobe.
To catch some of these exciting moments from the event, head to the Power 987 YouTube channel. Today, we make moves in proud partnership with South Africa's best network, MTN.
Peter's Plumbing fixes pipes, leaks and blockages for good South Africans. But one job made Tugela Falls look like a garden sprinkler. That water gushed, his client crashed. But Peter had budget insurance public liability cover. Everything was sorted before his business went down the drain. Get 1 million rand cover from just 250 rand a month. Visit budgetinsurance.co.za today for public liability.
Is the UK's #1 selling treatment for piles. The ointment and suppositories soothe itching, relieve discomfort and reduce inflammation. And for everyday hygiene, Annusol's flushable wipes are hypoallergenic and kind to sensitive skin. Ask your pharmacist for Annusol. Available at Clicks, Dischem and leading pharmacies.
So many business trends, immersive technologies, operational efficiencies, digital transformation. But how do you go about implementing them? MTN Business is here to help you take your business into the future. From connectivity to cutting-edge ICT services, including collaboration tools, cloud storage, cybersecurity, and IoT, we'll help you create and implement the digital solution your business needs to grow. Visit mtnbusiness.co.za. Today we make moves. MTN.
Power News.
Top stories at this hour. Murder accused Ndlozi Mnisi's bail hearing resumed this morning, and members of the South African Students' Federation are currently gathering in Marabastad in Pretoria. With your Power News at 11, a very good morning. I am Zulibanzi Mazibugo. We start off here today. Murder accused Ndlozi Mnisi claims the lead investigator in the Likhona Force case has a personal vendetta against him. Mnisi made this claim during his bail application at the Roodepoort Magistrates Court yesterday. He was arrested earlier this month in connection with the murder of 14-year-old Likhona Force, whose mutilated body was discovered in an open veld in Durban Deep in the west of Johannesburg. Now, Mnisi maintains he was not in the area when the teenager was killed. The bail hearing is said to resume this morning, and Power News reporter Bafanan Zimande is following the story.
Ndlozi Mnisi yesterday pleaded not guilty in the murder of 14-year-old Likhona Force. The 39-year-old says he has video footage and cell phone records to prove his case. The accused told the court that he gave this information to the investigating officer, but the policeman has failed to check the provided leads because he has a personal vendetta against him.
Hello? More the conduct of the investigating officer. He is now attacking my girlfriend. It's not officer. No, I do have proof on my girlfriend's phone, and I even explained to her that if now he is taken by you or shown an interest towards you, you will make it certain that he does other stuff.
Mnisi wants a new investigating officer to be appointed. The bail application will continue this morning. The defense is set to call Mnisi's girlfriend to the witness stand. Bafana Nzimande, Power News, Rodiport.
Moving on to this developing story now, members of the South African Students' Federation are currently gathering at an old bus depot in Marabastad. This is ahead of the march to the Department of Higher Education and Training in the Pretoria CBD. The march is dubbed a national shutdown to address issues pertaining to the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. Those participating in the march are demanding a resolution on the scheme's funding challenges and accommodation issues. Speaking to Power News, the Federation's Giamogedzwe Maseke says today's march aims to bring attention to the plight of students struggling with delayed NSFAS funding and inadequate allowances amongst many challenges.
So we propose that the minister at least must allocate at least 50% of his budget to these funds of the tuition funds of these students, so that come the 2026 academic year they're not affected, because many have been have written countless emails to NSFAS. They've still not received any feedback. There are appeals that have not even been approved till today.
A political analyst says the Democratic Alliance may not be in a strong position to unseat Johannesburg's Mayor Dada Morero in today's motion of no confidence. Morero faces his first no-confidence vote in council just months after taking office. The DA cites poor service delivery and the creation of a controversial bomb squad as reasons for the motion. Now speaking on Power Breakfast earlier, political analyst Dirk Kotze said Action SA is likely to be the key player in deciding the outcome.
I think what right now is that the fact that ANC itself is conceding that they are struggling to understand. First President Ramaphosa came there, and then the bomb squad that has been established by the council itself. So that's acknowledging that the situation is not going very well for them.
Now let's move to the Middle East, where both Iran and Israel say they will not break the ceasefire unless the other side does so first. This follows mutual accusations of truce violations. Despite recommitting to the ceasefire, both countries launched missile strikes on each other yesterday, each blaming the other for breaking the agreement. Israel had been targeting Iranian nuclear facilities in the days leading up to a U.S. military operation, but said it needed America's powerful 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs to finish the job. Now, Sina Tusi from the Center for International Policy says it's still unclear what Israel hoped to achieve with its initial strike, a question that may shape how this conflict unfolds.
Netanyahu said at the beginning that the war will not stop until they've destroyed Iran's nuclear and missile capabilities, and that objectively has not happened. The New York Times just released an article citing the U.S. intelligence community and its estimate of the damage done to Iran's main nuclear facilities on Saturday when the U.S. struck them, and the damage is minimal, that the equipment has not been damaged, the main halls underground have not been damaged. Iran still has its advanced centrifuges, its massive stockpiles of enriched uranium.
Now let's take a look at your financial indicators. The rand is trading at 17 rand 73 cents to the US dollar, 24 rand 16 cents to the pound sterling, and 20 rand 58 cents to the euro. Gold is trading at $3,327 a fine ounce, and Brent crude oil is at $68.04 a barrel. Let's recap the top story and Power News at this hour. Murder accused Duduzi Mnisi claims the lead investigator in the Likhona Force case has a personal vendetta against him. Mnisi made this claim during his bail application at the Rodiport's Magistrates Court, which is set to resume today.
Power News. On FM, online, and DSTV channel 889. This is Power 98.7. For 12 incredible years of powerful conversation.
A very special radio station that everybody can engage with.
Happy birthday to you guys, and a special shout out to the producer.
Birthday, happy birthday.
To you, we say power. Power 98.7. Now we're talking.
This is Power 98.7. And now you're listening to Power Talk with Dr Ndlozi, 9 a.m. to midday, taking your calls on 0861 987 000.
Accommodation in Lusaka. Nanlala on the floor. And you are very, very close, all of you. Very, very good friends. I was very shocked because I'm of the generation that contests Becky and Chris Hani, that there is an ocean of disagreements between the two of them. And he told us about the story of some guy who used to keep snakes that died terribly. That was made public over a hippopotamus. But 70 years of the Freedom Charter, Babu Mavusom Simang, and the importance of constitutional supremacy, your view.
Well, thank you very much. When you talk about the people slept on the floor, can I be heard? Can I be heard?
Yeah, we can hear you.
In that house in Lusaka outside this thing, you left out the most important one, which was O.R. Tambo. We took turns to do the chores, cooking, sweeping, and cleaning the house. So he too would insist, would try and shoulder him out and say, no, but Chief, this. He says, no, it's my turn today. And he would also wash the dishes.
Nice.
So that's the most important question. Maybe if you allow me, hi everybody, to start off by saying the people who drew up the Freedom Charter ended up with these words. These freedoms we will fight for side by side throughout our lives until we have won our liberty. That is the pledge that they put forward. I think we should appreciate that they lived up to that commitment. Getting to April 27, 1994, took precisely all of those things. People were involved in this, and it was very broad. The footprint of the ANC, even in these difficult times, remains quite large. But the people were subjected to all sorts of inconveniences as they fought for the Freedom Charter. People would be denied jobs, they would be imprisoned, they would be banned, many things. In the end, of course, there was, the ANC was banned, and then people decided to volunteer to fight, in keeping with the commitment that was made at the end when the Freedom Charter was drawn up, that we will pay for this freedom with our lives if need be. I think that's one aspect of the Freedom Charter that, to me, was an unqualified success. The commitment to achieve freedom was realized in 1994. Many people were born much later than that, much later than that, sometimes look down on the significance of April 27th, 1994, because of the difficulties that have been encountered going forward. But that's the most important date, in my opinion, not only in the free South Africa, but in the annals of South Africa. So the Freedom Fund, I don't know how much you want me to do this. So I would give them a really great round of applause. Fortunately, they don't include me. I was just 15 years when they drew this thing up and so on. But also to say, one of the achievements was that beyond 1994, 2 years later, the Constitution of South Africa was put in place. Constitution of South Africa, 1996, came into effect. This actually was the right terminology, was the consummation, if you will, of the wishes of the Freedom Charter, that the people shall govern and that the rights of the people will be honored. I've heard it, before I stop, I've heard it said that, oh, the Freedom Charter was, I don't know, done by white people and so on. Listen, the people who drew up the Freedom Charter, apartheid had put us, as you all know, I think that you know, in separate groups. You were Indians or coloreds, that was what it was, Africans and whites. Progressive, democratic people drawn from those groups as patriots, as South Africans, came together and said, we can't continue like this. Let's agree on a charter that will see to the freedom of the people who have been dispossessed and ruled and conquered, all of those things, for over 3 centuries. So some people say, when you say black and white, South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. That was an assertive statement. We had been given, 87% had been taken by white people of the land. So it wasn't as if, oh, you white people will also be members of the new South Africa. This South Africa, not just 13%, is the country that we are fighting for. And when, I can't resist this one, some people said, but including Indians, merchant class, they used to call them, white people, they are oppressors, is going to dilute the revolution. Oliver Tambo was very upset by that. He used to say, we must then blame our mothers if all the millions of us are going to be subverted by the introduction, by the inclusion of a couple of Indians and white people. And so we must be so inferior that our struggle would really be put back because we included 20 white people and 50 Indians. And so it angered him that that was the line of thinking. I think I would just, I don't know, just wanted to make that introduction. And of course there were things that the Freedom Charter undertook to perform. They are listed very nicely. We have failed dismally in the implementation of some of those things. We've succeeded in some. Thank you.
So much. I'm going to provoke Sibei. There's a trade unionist these days to say something. If you want to come through, 0861 through our lines, 0861 987 000. And I see that we do have some callers who would like to come in, but Sibei?
Thank you. Excuse me. I'm supposed to be on the panel. You know, I'm sitting here. I'm supposed to be on the panel with Dr. Ndlozi. And I'm wondering, I mean, at what point am I going to come in?
Okay.
Because
Okay. Let me take Sibei and then I'll come directly to you thereafter. There must be some confusion, but we'll fix it. That's my senior producer. That's my boss who's talking to you now. Yes, Chief.
I mean, briefly, just on the idea of the rule of law, because I think there is idea that people think that idea is very progressive. I mean, it was revolutionary if you think about it, to the extent that it emerged out of the beggar state, and, there was a protection against the feudal lords who, for them, the state was an extension of their personal estate. They were the law, they were the executors of the law, they were basically the judge on the law. So it protected, particularly, if you like, trading people against arbitrary expropriation and so on. But as against, the revolutionary working class today, that idea that basically seeks to entrench the private property regime over the means of production, and of course, against expropriations and all those things and so on, and the social relations that flow from that, it is reactionary. And to suggest, therefore, that it flows from the Freedom Charter, I think is to miss the point. The only way you can understand the Freedom Charter is that it was a battleground of contradictory class aspirations, because it came in the decade which has seen the biggest movement of the oppressed black majority since colonization, right? This was a time of mass struggles. I mean, the Port Elizabeth was brought to a standstill, in the 50s. There were movements in Skukuneland, in Pondoland, of the rural, oppressed people against the culling of cattle, evictions from their lands, all of that. Basically, it was in a period of revolutionary ferment. And that found expression in the charter itself. Because contrary to what people are saying, right, you just have to listen as to what the working class had in mind in terms of what they intended by the charter, by the way. From the record of the proceeding at the Congress of the People, the mover of the clause on the people shall share in the wealth of the land, right? And that's the reason I dispute that you can reconcile this with the bourgeois ideology, that actually is constitutionalism and the rule of law and other things. That, the mineral wealth, the banks, and monopoly industries shall be transferred to the common ownership of the people. He says the mover. It, the charter, says the ownership of the mines will be transferred to the people. It says wherever there's a gold mine, there will no longer be a compound boss. There will be a committee of workers to run the mine. Wherever there's a factory and the workers exploited, we say the workers will take over and run the factories. In other words, the ownership of the factories will come into the hands of the people. Let the banks come back to the people. Let us have the people's committee to run the banks. I
of the mover,
it
just for the...
It just from the record.
What's the source of what
I
you're
do
reading?
know that the second from the books I read was a delegate of a trade unions in Natal. In seconding the motion, he says, now comrades, the biggest difficulty...
For all our sake, what are you reading? What is the source?
Basically, these are the recordings
the mic.
of the proceedings at the Congress of the People.
And the source?
Demonstrate. I read secondary books, usually from Ingaba Yabasebenzi, which was the publication released by what was then called the Marxist Workers' Tendency of the ANC. But the mover, right, the second of the mover, makes a point as well, right, that the biggest difficulty we are facing in South Africa is that one of capitalism in all its oppressive measures versus the ordinary people. The ordinary workers in the country, we found in this country, as the mover of the resolution pointed out, the means of production, the factories, the land, the industries, and everything possible is owned by a small group of people who are the capitalists in this country. They skin the people, they live on the fat of the workers, and make them work. As a matter of fact, in exploitation, this is very important demand of the Freedom Charter now. We would like to see South Africa where industries, the land and the big business and the mines and everything that is owned by a small group of people in this country must be owned by all. the people in this country.
Thank
so
you.
what it shows is that the masses of the working class who are from the crucible of the struggles in the rural areas facing land dispossession, the workers in the mines and the factories, envisaged a far-reaching transformation than, of course, the elite in the ANC, who for them, in the words of Mandela, by the way, 1 year later in 1956, for them, Freedom Charter, even by its nationalization, wanted to break monopolies only so that it created conditions for emergence of a prosperous non-European bourgeoisie, which is what BE is about.
Yeah. I don't know how to move in the audience. I need one more hand. Are we going to Baba? Dinama Poske Nam Apa. We will clarify the panel question during the ad break, so I can apologize at the later stage. Yeah. I've got 2 more minutes before actually a little bit more before the headlines. Yes, sir.
Yes. I think, there are a couple of things that need to be clarified about the Freedom Charter. My sense is that you can actually divide it into 3 phases. There's 35 years of mass struggles in South Africa that precedes the Freedom Charter. This is from 1920 up to 1955. It's a 35-year period of intense mass struggles. And if one thinks about the epicenter, of these mass struggles, they would be across the Transkei, in Zululand, and on the South African highveld. I have written extensively, about those struggles and that period. We often refer to it as the mass struggles of the interwar years. Now, there's a reason why, even in academic history, in the historiography, we are unable to reflect on those mass struggles and the ways in which, if they were incorporated into the Freedom Charter, that they were, but they were not. And we can explain why they were not incorporated into the Freedom Charter. And maybe that would answer the question that Advocate Ngobaito is raising, which is that there has always been a suspicion that the Freedom Charter would have been drafted by a few whites. The issue here is that, does it reflect, the cumulative experiences of those mass struggles of the 1920s and 1930s?
Such as?
Such as, in fact, I'm going to mention quite a few of these. But at the center of that movement was the Wellingtonian movement, which lasted from about 1922 up to 1939. In actual fact, that mass movement is disrupted by the onset of the war, the 1939 to 45 war. Now, that movement was quite, it was quite resilient. If you want to think about...
What were its demands? What were its...
land would have been at the center of
So is there no land in the Freedom Charter?
Land would have been at the center of it, but the ways in which the demand for land was framed was completely different from what the Freedom Charter does with it.
What was the difference?
Just to give people a sense of, some of the highlights of this movement. The Bulhoek massacre.
No, before.
Is an outcome of that
What was
movement.
different? What did the Freedom Charter not say about the land, which was a demand of the land movement?
What the Freedom Charter is saying, and that those mass struggles were not about. Those mass struggles recognized the historical reality of conquest. The Freedom Charter does not recognize the historical reality of conquest. That's a reality. That's an established reality that we have today. If we center conquest, as shaping modern South Africa, then we will understand the difference between the land demands that Enoch Mgijima's Ama-Israeli were making and what is contained in the Freedom Charter.
What was Enoch Mgijima saying that is not in the Freedom Charter?
Unfortunately, we can talk about that. Like I say, I've written extensively on it. And the reason why we are debating it now
We haven't debated yet until you introduce the difference.
How much time
so
do we have?
The Freedom Charter
time
says
do we
in its
have?
land.
Because I really want to.
I need you to say so that we can disagree. The Freedom Charter says the land shall be shared amongst all who live in it. What is wrong or what is missing? Who work it? All who work it.
Okay,
what is missing so that we see the difference?
Okay. Let me just explain this. We seem to think that, colonialism was an event, a once-off event. Let me quickly point this out. Because you will understand. Colonialism, in the way it spread across South Africa, it was a patchwork. It was a patchwork of, we do things as we go along. So by 1922, you have a situation where there's land available to African people, but that land is not available to them on paper. In terms of the law, the land that the colonial, administration holds goes beyond what they have occupied, which is why you have this sinister concept of vacant crown land. But vacant crown land is what Israeli would have considered land available to them, and they used it. And for that, a massacre was visited upon them. That's the kind of land struggle that Enoch Mgijima and Israeli were leading. And the reason why the Freedom Charter is not containing that, it is precisely because it extends land ownership, and even ownership.
Okay, let's put it this way. What should the Freedom Charter have said to contain that struggle?
The Freedom Charter could...
What should it have said?
That this is, I think to some extent, this is not a kind of conversation, that becomes coherent. I'm trying to bring coherence into the historical struggles that preceded the Freedom Charter.
Unfortunately, we are on radio. Let me take the headlines. Yeah. Think about the framing. Help us. In what way did the Freedom Charter not take into consideration the demands of the masses between 1920 and 1955, which is what you frame as the first 35 years of mass struggle? We're going to take the headlines because I need the advocate to get clearly what the points of disagreements are, and then so that he's fair as well in his response. This is Power Talk, Bantwana Bengosi. We're going to take the headlines with Nyaka Lotefu and get back to the conversation.
A very good morning. In newsmaking headlines, Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi has announced the removal of 3 heads of department following the outcome of failed lifestyle audits. Providing an update earlier this morning, Lesufi also released forensic reports detailing corruption within the provincial government. Now, the crackdown follows a report by Gauteng's Ethics Advisory Council, which revealed a disturbing trend of senior government officials living lavish lifestyles that are inconsistent with their official incomes. Lesufi has highlighted that the Director General will oversee the removal process.
In the last report, we indicated that 37% were categorized at high risk or they failed the assessment. In line with due processes, officials whose lifestyles were found to be inconsistent with the audit findings were given an opportunity to provide explanation. In response to these findings, the provincial government, in collaboration with the SIU, which conducted the audits, had notified the affected employees, directing them to address and rectify and identify areas that the SIU was not happy with.
And Action SA says it will not be supporting Johannesburg's Mayor Dada Morero during today's motion of no confidence tabled against him. The party has cited a breakdown in service delivery and leadership failures. Speaking ahead of the council sitting, the party's national chairperson Michael Biomont says the party had formally communicated its stance to the ANC. Now, Biomont criticized the state of governance in the city, alluding to challenges impacting water and electricity, amongst others.
The residents of Johannesburg have endured a huge amount of instability, and that instability very clearly translating into failed service delivery. And in many ways, we're going to be telling you a story today about how the residents of Johannesburg are very much in the same position as we are, which is being messed around by the 2 largest parties in the City of Johannesburg Council. So Action SA has been involved in a process of engaging our structures, residents of Johannesburg, as well as the ANC. We met with the ANC on Monday night, and we have communicated to the ANC that we will not be voting to defend Dada Marrero.
I will have more details at 12.
The Midvaal local municipality will deliver its State of the Municipality address on Thursday, 26 June. During the address, the executive mayor will reflect on the past year, the progress made, the challenges faced, and outline the year ahead with bold steps under the Investing in Midvaal agenda, from clean energy and innovative service delivery to growing the local economy. Tune in to Power Lunch with Pabi Malloy for live updates throughout the show as we bring you the key highlights, in-depth analysis, and voices from the ground. The State of the Municipality address matters. It's about transparency, accountability, and the promises made to you. Stay informed, stay empowered. Only on Power 98.7.
Shilumana Group and the Thabo Mbeki Foundation came together with MTN to honor two significant milestones: President Thabo Mbeki's 83rd birthday and Power 98.7's 12th anniversary. This was more than a celebration. It was a powerful gathering of voices, leadership, and unity, a reflection of African excellence and progress. Thank you to everyone who tuned in, joined the conversation, and stood with us. Thank you to our partners, Shilumana Group, the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, S3, and MTN. Power 98.7. Now we're talking.
Getting you what you need to know. Power Talk, weekdays 9 a.m. to noon on Power 98.7.
Welcome back, Bantwana Benkosi. I'm going to go right into the callers here. I've got Kifenza Mkari. You've got 30 seconds. Shoot your question, brother.
Thank you very much, Ambition, to you, the advocate, and your audience. I just wanted to go back to your question that you asked, the very first question, whether or not we can draw any historical trajectory in as far as parliamentary supremacy is concerned. And I just wanted to ask the question, when we look at traditional leadership and how it runs the affairs of society, are we able to sort of draw any conclusions around whether or not it is leaning towards parliamentary supremacy or constitutional supremacy?
Okay.
And the second thing quickly, Dr. Mbishen, is that I think
one man, one woman, one question, Kifenze. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I think it's important, yes, it's important to speak about the Women's Charter, which precedes the Freedom Charter, so that we don't miss the role of women.
Thank you.
In this historical evolution that the advocate has outlined. Thank you.
Thank you. Final question. Loyiso in Cape Town. 30 seconds, brother.
Good afternoon, Doc and advocate. I just want to ask in relation to the power of political parties. Does the advocate think that political parties somewhat limit the power of the president to elect ministers as per the constitution? I'm saying this in light of the GNU, where political parties gave president some instruction to elect who and who to be ministers in order to join the GNU. So I want to know, does he think that limits the constitutional power of governance? Can you comment on the legality of such actions?
Thank you. And I've got Advocate Tsidiso Tipanyani from the South African Human Rights Council. Advocate? Commission, rather.
Currently the chair of the South African Institute for Responsible and Accountable Governance. I just want to say, for me, I see the Freedom Charter really as a product of a process in a country's and people's struggles. And we should look at it like that, And I think there's still a need for further discussions, because what was being discussed in 1955, some things have changed, and some things also have not happened. Whether it's issue of land, whether it's issues of international relationships and stuff like that. There's also another clause here which talks about the people of the protectorates Basotho land, Bechuanaland and Swaziland shall be free to decide for themselves. So when we talk about South Africa as our land, and we exclude the fact that, colonization took people's lands, What does this clause mean today? So in 1994, we didn't even discuss, when we were starting New South Africa, what are the implications of colonization of those people's lands when we talk about land today? So for me, I think there might
You're
be
saying, advocate, we should have run referendums in Swaziland, Lesotho, and Botswana.
Well, we are saying here that we will allow these people to decide. But now, how do they decide when their lands were taken away by the British and they're now part of South Africa? And we talk about land belonging to people who live in it. So at some point in time, there should have been some discussion to say, how do you address this situation?
Yeah.
But as I'm saying, for me, it's a process and a continuation. So we still have to talk more about, it's not an end to itself. It's just a process which is very important. Minus all its flaws.
Yeah. All right, Busi Kamulani of CALS. Also, a minute. I'm going to propose, because we can continue on YouTube. We don't have to stop when the show ends at 1200 hours. My producer is going to advise so that maybe we can all agree that we just push until 1300 hours so that there's an exhaustive response, because the record at least will be there on YouTube for everybody to see. Busi?
Thank you, Dr. Ndlozi, and thank you, Advocate. I think about how kind of the Freedom Charter goes a step further than what we've gone with the Constitution. And I wonder what are the ways in which we can collectively mobilize, particularly the legal sector, I'm a lawyer, to keep the Freedom Charter alive, or at least the ideals of the Freedom Charter alive. And this is also thinking about how the will of the people, the Constitution should be a reflection of the will of the people. And we shouldn't be afraid to challenge if we feel that these constructions are not a reflection of what we want as a society. And so what are the ways in which we can push things a lot further than what we're going? And I think this question gets lost when we move away from centering the Freedom Charter. Yes, the Constitution draws inspiration from the Charter, but how much further can we go to achieve these ideals? And I think it goes back to the current agitation around whether the Constitution is fulfilling the needs and the desires of this country, or responding in the way that it was supposed to, in mind of the people such as Z.K. Matthews, who had these in mind of the true freedom of the nation. Thanks.
Let's go to Action SA Deputy President, who is also here, Dr. Kekan.
Thank you, Dr.
Very
Ndlozi.
interesting to maybe start off by telling us if Action SA believes in the Freedom Charter.
Thank you, Advocate. No, we can, without reservations, confirm that Action SA supports the Freedom Charter, and we believe in Freedom Charter. And above that, we believe in constitutional democracy. You know, it's very painful that you can take a list of the needs which were drafted in Freedom Charter, but there's none that you can tick that has been achieved. The land, the doors of learning, security and comfort, and all those things. We are also sitting here, we have never even enjoyed the fruits of Zondo Commission, which were put out clear on the issue of electoral reform. We are sitting in a country whereby the people who said, we the people shall govern, they don't have any single power of electing a president. A president is elected by 400 people in parliament. Especially now with this arrangement of GNU, we might find a white president very, very soon.
Is that a bad thing?
It is not a bad thing, but it has to reflect the needs of the
I'm
people.
thinking if the president is Carl Niehaus, would you have a problem with him? Is he white?
But we are living in a country whereby majority must rule. So the question that I want to put forward to advocate, it's something which bothers us as Action SA, Section 174 of the Constitution, whereby it gives almost president all the powers to appoint judges. And somehow, it promotes parliamentary supremacy in a sense that the president, we cannot deny it. It's a head of a political party. We cannot separate that. So we are seeing Parliament appointing a president, and there's no check and balance around that. So I wanted to check the view of our honorable advocate in terms of the entire 174, because it gives president the entire powers to appoint and disappoint, and it really worries us from that point.
Let me disappoint you then and go back to the advocate. I think my team, Tinyuko, let's check the possibilities of leaving a radio and staying for just another hour in the room on the YouTube platform. Because I do think that we need to get back the questions around the first 35 years and how the mass struggles and their demands did not find expression into the Freedom Charter. But I don't want you to be overwhelmed in, I think there's a lot that has come through. So let's go back to Advocate Toby.
Thank you, Dr. Ndlozi, at least for thinking about my welfare, ensuring that I don't get overwhelmed. I needed someone to do that. I don't know where to start, but I think let's start with the rule of law and the bourgeois question, which is Sebei's point. I don't know if Sebei remembers that he used to organize unorganized workers, I think more than 10 years ago, in the labor court, which I thought was impressive at that stage. So I've seen him recently as a very articulate analyst on television, and I've sort of always been impressed. But those were the days. Look, I think this topic about the connections between the rule of law and the bourgeois, and whether or not the Freedom Charter sort of departed from the sort of pattern of the rule of law that the ANC adopted in 1912. Firstly, we just need to look at the charter itself. I mean, there are, I think, 3 clauses in the charter that totally affirm the importance of law in the courts. So the first one is all national groups shall have equal rights. There shall be equal status in the bodies of the state, in the courts, right, and in the schools for all national groups and races. And then there is a second one, second clause around there. All people shall have equal rights. All national groups shall be protected by law. And then the final one, all apartheid laws and practices shall be set aside. Then you go further, there's another one, all shall be equal before the law. Right? No one shall be imprisoned, deported, or restricted without a fair trial. And the fair trial takes place before a court, which shall have equal status. And the reason for that was because they did not have equal status, because this was the era of parliamentary sovereignty. No one shall be condemned by the order of any government official. Sobukwe was condemned by the order of a government official. You can only be condemned by the order of a judge. The courts shall be representative of the people. In other words, the racial and gender composition shall reflect the people. That's section 175, 174, Dr. Kekan. Right. Imprisonment shall only be for serious crimes against the people and shall aim at re-education, not vengeance, which is what we currently have now in the Criminal Procedure Act. The police force and army shall be open to all on an equal basis, and shall be helpers and protectors of all of the people. All laws which discriminate on the grounds of race, color, and belief shall be repealed. That's section 9 of the Constitution. And then all shall enjoy equal human rights. The law shall guarantee. So, I mean, we can go on and on and on. It's unmistakable that the Freedom Charter is anchored in the rule of law. And it's unmistakable that the Freedom Charter protects the courts, that it wants the courts to be independent, but it wants the courts to be representative of all people. It's unclear to me why people repeatedly spread the myth of the Freedom Charter as a bourgeois document. or sorry, of the rule of law as a bourgeois instrument, yes, that is against the Freedom Charter, and that the Freedom Charter sought to subvert it. The Freedom Charter was an affirmation of a historical commitment of the ANC to the rule of law. The words are there. Now, I haven't read Mr. Sebei's person who spoke at the Freedom Charter, but I've read the text of the Freedom Charter. And the pattern is consistent between 1923, 1943, and 1955. And, you know, when I was a clerk at the Constitutional Court some years ago, when my clerkship ended, I had a discussion with Arthur Chaskelson, whom I was clerking for. I asked him about the freedom. I was younger then, you know, like sort of, I always thought I was revolutionary when I was young. I asked him about the Freedom Charter, you know, and then he laughed and said the Freedom Charter is in the Constitution. But I think that was profound, you know, that was profound. It is, in fact, in the Constitution. The problem is a betrayal of the Constitution by the ruling elite. You know, the ruling elite has betrayed the Freedom Charter, it has betrayed the Constitution. That's the problem we should be debating as society, not an abstract conversation about the differences between the Constitution and the Freedom Charter. Right? They have betrayed it in so many obvious ways. You spoke about the Zondo Commission. This is a clear betrayal of the Freedom Charter. Right? It says the people shall govern, the elites are governing. You know? So we can go on and on about the forms of the betrayal. So we live the Freedom Charter only in rhetorical terms. We don't live it in reality. That's what we should be fighting for, is to implement the Freedom Charter. Now, there is another point about how the Freedom Charter didn't articulate the struggles that came before it.
Let me ask you to, for the sake of our Cape Town listeners and all of that, to start with the traditional leadership and the limits on political parties. Well, the limits on the president to appoint and disappoint. Yeah.
All right. No, thank you.
Yeah, and then we can, if you can start doing that as well.
Yes,
so that's just prioritizing that.
Okay, no, that's fine. I'll do that. So let's start then with Dr. Kekana's point, which is the Section 174 of the Constitution. Yes, I mean, the president obviously puts the final stamp on the appointment of the judges, but the president cannot depart. The Constitution uses the word advice. The president cannot depart from the list that he has been given by the Judicial Services Commission. So for all of the High Court appointments, all of the Supreme Court of Appeal, all of the labor, land, competition, he gets a list from the JSC. He must appoint those people in that list. So it says that there has to be an appointing authority, you know, and the president happens to put the stamp, but he really is a rubber stamp. The only time where he has a wiggle room is in the Constitutional Court judges. But even there, he must appoint from the list given to him. So we give him 4 names, he must choose 1 name. But he can't say, I don't like these names, I'll go elsewhere. Where he has complete authority is well, it's not complete because it's limited, because he must do it in consultation, is the appointment of the Chief Justice, the Deputy Chief Justice, the President of the Supreme Court of Appeal, and the Deputy President of the Supreme Court of Appeal. So there he appoints after consulting the Judicial Service Commission. So he gives us a list, we interview. What would be interesting is if the JSC said to him, the candidate you've given us is not appointable, to see whether he would still appoint them. But that has not happened yet. You know, so I don't think that power is as big as it is made out to be. It's only that in any system, someone needs to say, you are appointed, you can earn a salary from now on. And then you also wanted me to talk about the chiefs, traditional authorities. Yeah, you know, traditional authorities are an interesting concept. They are in section 211 and 214 of the Constitution. But here is the real problem, is if you have a wall-to-wall municipal system, a wall-to-wall, there is not a single inch of this country that does not have an elected councillor, wall-to-wall, right? And then you have a provincial system, and then on top of that you have a national system. What is the role then of a traditional leader? Because it's wall to wall, so there is no space in this country that's not covered by a democratic election. You know, what is the role of a traditional leader? This problem has never been satisfactorily resolved, and which is why you've got a vague clause in the Constitution that says that the traditional leaders will be responsible to administer a system of customary law, which is not real democratic power where you make political decisions about development, right? But it then becomes a cultural power where you can make decisions about culture. But again, that's limited because...
What is an example of such a cultural decision?
So for instance,
what to wear in the next festival?
When is the season of initiation,
okay.
Among the Xhosa or among the Pedi or any of the communities that practice the system, you know? Or what is the number of cattle to be exchanged for lobola? You know? So
let's go to the question of the struggles of the first 35 years.
Now, the only example that has been mentioned there is Mgijima. Yes, and the struggle of the Israelites in 1921.
And we are not speaking about the state of Israel, just clarity there.
No, it's the church, yeah. They call themselves Am Israel, the Israelites, yeah. I mean, when you actually look at the record of that trial, luckily I did a full paper on that, the actual record of the trial. There were three primary factors there that were behind the Israelites. Land was a problem because of the 1913 Native Land Act. But the Spanish influenza was a greater problem. There were a lot of people dying without explanations. And so you had this religious appeal to divine intervention. You know, and then you have the third problem, beyond unexplained deaths, beyond which is now the new policies of Jan Smuts and how they were impacting, quote unquote, on natives. When the trial was held, what the witnesses said was that they wanted a place to pray. They wanted to communicate with God, to bring rain, to chase away evil, etc. And the reason they chose to pray in the vacant space, it was a commonage. They identified a commonage just outside of Queenstown. And the reason they chose that commonage, right, was because it was crown land. And crown land belongs to God. And no one can remove them in a place that belongs to God. And that's why they felt they could resist. They were given instructions to move, but they felt they could resist those instructions because they were communicating with God directly. But their ultimate demand was for more land. It was not for a different form of tenure. It was for more land. The land they had was too little. It was for more land and a space for the church to pray. Now, your question is excellent, by the way, Dr. Ndlozi, to the comrade who spoke, which is, how would that demand be articulated in the Freedom Charter? Speaking for myself, I don't see how it could be articulated better than it was reflected in the Freedom Charter, which is, the land shall be divided among those who work it. If they could show that they work the land, it should be divided among them. And the other point, which again was a problem in Mgijima, is racial restrictions of land, over the land. The Freedom Charter says all of the racial restrictions over the land shall be removed. So it's actually a reflection of that demand. I do really have a problem with, and this is common in South Africa, Sort of general statements are made about a document as important as the Freedom Charter. And there is then a vague appeal to history. And when you actually look at the historical material, some of these claims are not borne out, like the claim we've been talking about. Whites wrote the Freedom Charter and they presented it to blacks, and then the blacks slavishly followed it. But that's just not borne out by anything. You know? So I'm afraid to say that although I appreciate the point, I don't think the Mgijima example is a good example to illustrate the problem that the Freedom Charter did not reflect the struggles of the preceding 35 years. Thank you. I must now shut up, I think.
That brings us to the end of the show on the part of our radio listeners. And you've been listening to the voice of Advocate Tembeka Toby on Power Talk. With me, Dr Ndlozi, on our feature of Political School, marking 70 years of the Freedom Charter. And we are now going to go to the news with Zwelibanzi Mazibuko. Please stay tuned for Power Lunch with Pabi. From me here, Ndintanda Nonke Makaya. Thank you.
Power News.
Top stories at this
I'm
hour.
going to proceed back to Ubabala since we have another hour. Yeah, so that can we give him the mic to expand on the 55. Maybe you could add for us the examples beyond the Israeli. And then also I heard the hand of Nkululeko Sibia. And then after Advocate Prince Mafu and Edward Mulopi of the Advocate Office Seri. Advocate Prince Mafu is a constitutional law expert. He was with us, I think, 2 days ago on the show. The first 35 years. In what way were the mass struggles not expressed in the Freedom Charter? Over to you, Bob.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking that maybe I need to put this into a kind of a political and probably a historical context. What I'm actually drawing on here is South African historiography and the character of South African historiography. The historical moment we are talking about, the mass struggles of the interwar period, they happen at the time when historians, widely agree that at that particular historical moment, the ANC was defunct. And there's a great deal of historical evidence that actually proves that. And if you think about engagement with the colonial state during that 20-year period, it is carried out by localized mass protests. And they happen in specific areas. And these are particularly important areas, for shaping the future of South Africa in very many ways. Part of the reaction, part of the story here is that the mass movement is also responding to a later piece of legislation, which is also based on land. And that is Herzog's 1936 Native Trust and Land Act. And it is that particular act which then activate a lot of people, the mass movement, particularly between 1936 and 1941. It's a very short period, but within that period, the mass movement actually suffered serious setbacks. One of the setbacks, the very first one, was the onset of the war and a great deal of movement, particularly in that region. The second development here is that when the war, begins to break out, that area which you refer to as vacant crown land, which was contested area, is now being crisscrossed, not by colonial settlements, but by colonial infrastructure, which makes it now impossible to do what you are referring to, that Israeli were merely expanding into vacant land. That land closer to the wall is no longer vacant and no longer available to them. That becomes one of the push factors. One of the things that South African historiography does not account for is the fact that the particular pattern of migration that comes out of those places is not single male migration. For the first time, you have family migrations. What does that tell you? It tells you that in those regions, life has become untenable. And when people leave, they uproot entire families. Now, that in itself is an indication of the fact that their struggle has come to an end. And that is not reflected in the Freedom Charter. That's the point that I'm making. But you are also asking, was that documented? This was not...
No, I don't want documentation.
Yes, okay, that's fine.
If it were to be reflected...
How would it be reflected?
What would the Freedom Charter would have said? What would it say? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll come.
What the Freedom okay, let's look at 2 years after the passage of the Freedom Charter. This is a perfect example that I always give. In 1957, Bakubung Baha, they call themselves Bakubung. They were situated just outside Pretoria. It's a classic case. Situated outside Pretoria, you probably would know the place. When you drive towards Krugersdorp, it says Boons or Molote. That's the area. That was an African-owned area. Now, it falls under that, patterns of land ownership that came out of the 1913 Land Act. African people using the intermediate of missionaries to buy land. Bakubung Bahamunna Khutla bought land at that time. Now, in 1957, 2 years after the Freedom Charter was adopted, the Bakubung Bamunna Khutla received a notice of eviction that they were going to be moved from that place and taken to Liedach next to Sun City. A little corner, a small corner in hell compared to where they were in Boons. The Freedom Charter not only did it respond, or the ANC did not even, there was no sense of what was happening with the Bakubung. So I'm not talking about how it could have been reflected. Those struggles could have been reflected. Okay. Those struggles were real. They were taking place. It is historians who would, years later, document what those struggles were about. And that's the point that I'm actually making here.
Okay.
So that would be my first phase. In fact, someone also asked, apart from the Bulhoek thing, what else was there in terms of the mass movement? Prophetess Nonteta, who was actually declared insane and taken to Wisconsin in Pretoria. She died there. That was yet another movement. Amafela Ndaonye was a women's movement, and they too were actually fighting the same struggles. But the most resistant in this mass movement was the Wellingtonian movement. And it only collapsed in 1939 when the entire leadership was put on trial and actually sentenced to jail. That's the one. The one thing is that these were land struggles. But land struggles were not the only thing. Education was at the center of these struggles. These people did not call for the doors of learning and culture must be open. What their struggle was about, it was about establishing their own schools, which they pretty much did. In fact, the last independent school that existed in the area only ended in 1941. 2 years after the outbreak of the war, and 2 years after the end of the Wellingtonian movement as an organizational structure. Now, all of that is not captured. I'm not saying it should be captured in the document. What I'm saying is that there is no commitment on the part of the Freedom Charter to reignite those struggles after 1955 and carry them on. Can I finish? The last part here.
We have to give others a chance. Okay. Thank you. Nonkululeko Sibiya.
Sanbonani Nonke, igama uNkululeko Sibiya, from Wits University. I'm a student there. From the presentation of Yako Advocate, I gather that based on the current political configuration or how our state is configured, is the suggestion then that the full realization of the Freedom Charter cannot happen in the sense that in Parliament the people are not represented as demanded by the Freedom Charter? And are you saying that the best bet that the people have is through the courts, the Constitution? And again, I just want maybe clarity on the people, who they are, because maybe implicitly we are running around the question of, is it an elitist document or the document of the people? Because under where it's talking about land shall be shared among those who work it, it says, and I want to hear how you understand this terminology. Maybe I'm just being, it's just semantics. The state shall help the peasants with implements, seed, tractors, and dams to save the soil and assist the tillers. Is there a difference for you between the peasants and the people?
Okay, my list says Advocate Prince Mafu, and then followed by Edward Mulupi. I hope I said that correctly.
Yeah, good afternoon, Doc. Good afternoon, SC. Mine is to get your opinion on the wording of the Constitution insofar as the socioeconomic rights are concerned. You would note that there is much emphasis on the term progressive realization insofar as socioeconomic rights. Vis-a-vis when we juxtapose it with the Freedom Charter, there seems to be a radical approach to the issue of a division of resources. My question then to you seems to say, in this current constitutional dispensation, is the approach towards this division of resources quietly covered in the Constitution, given the wording progressive realization, or there is more that needs to be processed and refined so that we realize and tie the two, so that the realization of these resources to the masses of the people is better attained?
Yeah.
So that's what I want to understand.
Okay. Edward Mulupi from Advocacy Office at SERI.
Yeah, thanks, Doc.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Advocate. Yeah, you pronounced it perfectly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm trying my best, yeah.
Yeah. I think maybe, Advocate, when you ended your 20-minute provocation at the beginning, you ended it by saying that we need to protect the constitutionalism or constitutional democracy if we want to protect the Bill of Rights. And I think maybe that's where the contention now is, that the consensus around the protection of the Bill of Rights is no longer a consensus amongst the population. That I think there is a growing maybe discontent with how the Bill of Rights is and what it promises, and that and this is in line with the questions about the Constitution itself and whether it works for us, about whether we should actually be offering as a nation these Bill of Rights. And I think maybe then my question is, what are the perils that we are facing if we don't take it for granted that the Bill of Rights needs to be protected, as you are inviting us to do?
There seemed to be, Sibei wanted to add something. I want, come again? Yeah, to Opera Steve, yeah.
No, it's very simple. I wanted to respond there.
Respond or add, okay?
Okay.
Let's
I mean,
hear
the thing is,
your thoughts, yes.
They were much more powerful and I think far-reaching mass movements of the rural people than the instance of the Israelis that he mentions, right? And I think you find that in the language of the Freedom Charter. The Israelites, yes.
What did he
say?
say?
Sorry, thank you. Yeah.
Israelis.
No, you're right. You're right. And that's very important because I think my intervention in the discussion was to say that, in actual fact, the authors that are ignored, right? When people talk about the authorship of the Freedom Charter,
I see,
is the ordinary masses of the working class, urban and rural, who the charter in its most radical form, expressed their class aspirations.
And yet, Bay, without being too pushy, you can give us the names.
Well, no. I mean,
this is the point, isn't it?
No, but you are being
This is the point.
The thing about the names, my point is that I cited you the source. I can always find you the source. These are the recordings of the proceedings, right, of the Congress of the People.
No, I want to make. Right? No, you are still on platform. Don't worry. I want to make it simple for us. This point you're making.
Yeah.
The mention of ZK Matthews is, I think, it's what you will confirm what you are aiming at. That there were other voices at the Congress of the People. If it's the proceedings, there were nonetheless representatives. And if a person was speaking there as part of those 3,000 people, would have had a name that they are so-and-so, they are seconding, and they are seconding a motion raised by so-and-so, and they represent a specific constituency of a specific movement in the rural areas, not just ANC, Indian Congress, and Colored Congress. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, my point is that these were trade unionists who put these clauses.
Yeah.
The language on the land, in actual fact, I mean, the state shall not, steal or deprive people of their cattle, is because of the mass movement.
Yes.
If you look at the struggles
Yes.
in Pondoland,
Yes.
the struggles in Skukune, right? The struggles in Mariko, you should go and read Gavin Beg's Peasant Revolts, right? You will see the language of that movement, and you can see the clauses there are a direct reflection, right? The land shall be distributed among those who work it, right? People shall not have their cattle taken and stolen arbitrarily and all those things.
Unfortunately, you agree with Tembe.
Yeah.
What you are not agreeing with, because I thought you were helping Bra Steve. Bra Steve is saying those are not what is reflective. Those demands don't reflect those movements.
No, my point with him is that he's talking about a very tiny movement compared. The movement
no, but he
of
mentioned
the people,
others recently.
The people I'm talking about,
Yeah.
right? These are movements of hundreds of thousands of people in the 50s in rural areas.
And they
There
were
was a
at the
state-
Freedom Cliptown Congress meeting.
These are
Excellent.
the people, the people who led. Look at Kukune, right? These are the people like John Gadimeng, Bushielo, and others, who, by the way, consider themselves communist as well, right? African communist in their own day.
Yeah.
I mean, the Pondoland, you go IB Tabata and all those people. Lots of those people were actually migrant workers who also work in urban areas, linking the struggles of the urban proletariat at the time with the movements in rural areas. And my point is that that role and the fact that the Freedom Charter, the reason it came under attack, if you look at the dilution and emasculation of its radical aims by the ANC leadership, is that it reflected a period in history where the ANC, by the way, which was established by the elite, men who gathered at Mangau in 1912. These were men, wearing tailcoats, with walking stick, hand gloves, and all of that, right? In the 50s, the ANC transformed for the first time against the background of those mass movements.
Yes.
Right, of women, of rural masses, on the strikes,
So 1955 is radically a mass-based outcome.
It's a red 50s.
Yes,
That's
agreed.
the point. So it is those class aspirations between the elite who only want the deracialization of capitalism and, of course, the far-reaching transformation envisaged by the masses of the working class
Thank you.
that came into conflict. And
Let me give Tembega a time to
yeah.
reply then, and then we'll come back for the final. Yeah, well, let's give the Tembega to reply, then we'll take a last round. And I still want Bob Mavuso Msimang to speak. Maybe you can have the final word with respect, Tembega. Yeah.
No, I think, Dr. Ndlozi, it's been very helpful for you to extend this, because I think we now have a clearer articulation from Sebei about what point he was driving. Yeah. In fact, it turns out we agree. Yeah. You know? Yeah. And I think his critique, actually, of my thesis is a valid critique, because what he says is that I have tended to focus on the big man of the time, and that has overshadowed the grassroots struggles. I think that's a fair point to be made, that we need to discover those voices. But the main point he makes, we completely agree with, that the Freedom Charter was an articulation of the mass struggles that were prevalent at the time, and it continues to be an inspiration of the masses, and that's why we have to protect it. Included in that struggle was the protection of the courts, provided that they were transformed to represent the people. E.P. Thompson is the great Marxist historian of the 20th century, wrote the book on the origins of the Black Act in the UK, which was the act to protect the forests.
Oh, yes,
yes. Yes. He has a chapter, I think it's chapter 10 or chapter 11, on the rule of law. He astonished his Marxist friends when he proclaimed that the rule of law is an unqualified public good. Right? And then he says it is an unqualified public good because the poor and the rich alike swear allegiance to it. When it is an instrument in the hands of the poor, it could be a potent instrument. It is always about the perspective from which you look at it. But as a public good, it's unqualified. Right? Now, that statement from E.P. Thompson, that was written in 1975 already, but it...
Put differently, Tembega, rule of law precedes the bourgeois revolution.
Yes.
If you were to properly historicize it.
Yes.
It's actually the most unscientific assessment to associate it with the most recent human history, which is the capitalist history, or bourgeois history. It's just different terms, English and French. But the idea of the supremacy of the law even precedes the supremacy of God.
Yes. The supremacy of the law, if you recall.
It precedes. It is so old anthropologically that it precedes that the gods will have the final, even the gods subject themselves to the rules that they put.
Yes,
precisely. They leave. God himself in a debate, for instance, with Abraham, or when you go to Socratic dialogues, Plato's dialogue, Socrates asks the question, is good good because the gods say it's good, or the gods say good is good because it is good?
Yes.
And the Greek state or the Greek societies were not bourgeoisie. To associate that idea is to give too much credit to capitalist reorganization of property relations.
Precisely. And the Magna Carta, right, was fought over, and the Magna Carta was fought over this topic about subjecting kings to the law. Yes. So its emergence was always about the constraint of power of the rulers. Whoever they are, you see. And this is why even the greatest of all Marxist historians, E.P. Thompson, says this is an unqualified public good. So it's what the workers always needed to protect themselves against the capitalists. They needed the rule of law. So its distortions by the capitalists have never sought to destroy its essence. So that's why we still defend the rule of law. against the distortions. That's why I actually think Sebe is making a much more radical point around the way in which the working class articulated themselves in the Freedom Charter, which then became the Constitution. I wish the same argument, or same research, I haven't done it, could be done around the 1996 Constitution, particularly the Constituent Assemblies. I know there is a lot of feeling that that struggle was hijacked by the elites, but to look at what was the voice of the rural masses, to look at in the minutiae to see who spoke where, you know. The voices we get is usually, well, Joe Slovo said this, but we don't really get to know who was speaking on behalf of the masses and what did they say in the drafting of the Constitution itself.
I'll ask a much more provocative question to you. Honestly, elites, and the ANC was elite. The ANC of 55, and definitely the ANC of the 90s, is not the Bloemfontein ANC or the South African Communist Party. When we come to the party, then, I mean, the vanguard is unapologetically elite. The trade unions are different, but Lenin makes no apology about the fact that who are the communists. But this ANC of 96, of 95, 94, is it an elite ANC?
No, but I don't think that the ANC of 1912 is qualitatively different to the ANC of today in terms of its composition. I mean, just go to the National Conference. What you find there is basically elites, that 4,000 of them.
Yeah, but in what way? I mean, I'm trying to get this sense of this elite. A branch as Mkandule.
Yes, but who is in the branch? I mean, it's councillors. So they are the...
they are the elite in the rural area. But so is John Nkadime.
Yes, I agree with that. I don't have a problem with that. That's why I just think that the distinction that we usually make between elite and non-elite is sometimes itself illusory.
Okay. Because I'm not sure that the people who are mobilizing our people just get dismissed like that. Activists who are saying to our people, let's go and block a road. Later on, we are told those are just elites. A principal, for an example, who joins a branch or who says, no, we must go and start classes. I'm going to leave here in Soweto, I'm going to go to Skukuni, I'm going to start classes and teach our people. Later on, when he leads a movement of education,
working class interests. I mean, your point is a good point, which is, I mean, Biko, you know, in a sense is an elite, you know, but no one can doubt that he was articulating the aspirations.
I would never go in a room, Tembega, and agree with somebody dismissing Sbey as an elite. Yes. But by that definition, he should be an elite.
He is.
You know, a person that speaks like Brastine, he's an elite. And I think often these definitions are mobilized to delegitimize activists.
Yes.
When we should judge people on the basis of the ideas they are putting on the table, the interest that they are speaking for, the future that they are advocating.
Yes.
In a different circle, you should be dismissed as an elite.
I am.
Which means you can't speak, you can't get in a court and speak for Amazraeli.
It's all nonsense. It's really all nonsense.
Amazraeli should speak for themselves, not you.
It's all nonsense. Yeah. So just to close this topic, I mean, on agreement with Sabei's point, which is that ultimately the Charter did represent those interests, but my point is those interests included the protection of the rule of law because of this historical association that I ascribe to the rule of law, to the struggles of the poor, and that we should be careful not to allow it to be distorted along the way by bourgeois capitalists. And that's been the persistent argument that has been made by people against the law as such. Then there is a second issue around the representative government and whether my argument is that there will never be a full realization. No, I'm not making that argument. I'm not saying that the charter will never be fully realized until we change the form of representation. My argument is simply to call out the duplicity of those who argue for parliamentary supremacy. That it's a duplicitous argument because it presupposes a form of direct democracy. And when you actually unpack it, what you find is an appropriation of power by the elites, again, against the people. You know, so that was the reason I was raising that, is simply to call out the duplicity.
Let me put it this way. From constitutional court to parliament is elite to elite.
Yeah, 400 elites versus
12 elites.
11, yeah.
11 elites.
Yeah.
With their clerks and advocates.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not really a shift.
No. So it's really the interests that are at stake.
It's not like when you have a parliamentary democracy, you actually have the people ruling.
No, this is where the duplicity of this thing is. But when you look at the qualitative discussion, I mean, the Constitutional Court has delivered like 990 judgments ever since it was established. You can go through them, judgment after judgment, where they are calling out the failure of the government to fulfill the promises in the Constitution, striking out legislation because it perpetuates inequality, etc., etc. And where Parliament has always been found wanting on the most basic of the functions that it has to perform. It protected Jacob Zuma in the Nkandla scandal. It had to be called out by the Constitutional Court. You know.
Are you able to repeat your defense of his arrest?
Whose arrest?
Of Zuma's arrest. 'Cause I suspect that's where parliamentary supremacy originates from. That a moment like that, what was the summary of why was it right for him to be arrested?
Look, I have to speak to my clients on that. I was counsel in the matter.
Well, it was a public trial.
Yeah, I know. Where some people said there was no trial. I'm glad you're calling it a public trial. Because all of us were in the trial. He just didn't show up. You know. Look, I think I might run into trouble with the bar, so let me leave that for now. But anyway.
Okay, we can deal with the rest.
Yeah, we can deal with the rest. I was talking more about the Nkandla case, not the 2016 judgments, not the money. Yes, which was where you were involved.
I'm always on the right side.
No, on that one you were definitely on the right side of history. So, and no, the answer is not through the courts all the time. We must remember how the courts function. I make two examples. One is the case of Kolobeni. What happens is there is an Australian company that quote-unquote discovers, they always say they've discovered these things, despite the fact that black people have known about their existence for hundreds of years. They discover titanium in Pondoland. They decide that they will mine it. They go and ask the government for permission to mine it. The government gives it to them, and it ignores the local population. Then they show up and they close the river stream. And when they reopen it, the water has been contaminated. And people go sick and the cattle go sick. And the community rises against this. Right? They block it. And the community says, our association with mining is that it poisons the water. And so we don't want mining in the community. And everyone says the community is mad. How can you not want mining? Because it will give you jobs. Right? And that's how the story is then run in the media. But they ran the struggle for 10 years. Eventually they say, let's go and see a lawyer. Then the lawyer takes a case, and then we get an interdict. But the television is there only when the lawyer speaks. But it's at the end of a 10-year struggle. And then people then say, oh, well, the lawyer is a hero. But the lawyer knows nothing about the struggle. He showed up on one day for 1 hour and he won the case. But he has now hijacked the struggle of the community. So you then go back to the community. Is it more important that you have grassroots struggle or more important that you have the lawyers? Then it seems to me it's more important that you have the grassroots struggle. The lawyers only supplement. They come in and out. And as soon as they're finished, they get out. And the struggle is then sustained by the communities. So what we then need is to build robust communities to protect themselves. And then the law is only a shield at the last minute. Same example to be made about the another Pondoland community. Somebody shows up with a boat, they start shooting down the waters, and then they're wondering, why are there no fish every time we go to fish? Because their stable diet is the fish that they get from the sea. They believe that this fish has been given to them by God. And they have been eating this fish for hundreds and hundreds of years. They use it to supplement for protein because they have no money otherwise, right? And then suddenly this big ship has made the fish to disappear. They don't know what happens. Then finally they go and see a lawyer. A lawyer says, let's research this. And when they do the research, they find that the reason why this big ship has been here is because it's been given permission to explore the water, and it's blasting under the water. And that is why the fish are so terrified that they've disappeared. Yes, there is a legal solution, we can go to court. But again, the lawyer comes 5 years after the struggle has begun. And the lawyer gets an interdict, but they disappear. So again, another example, it's the communities that are important, it's the communities that sustain the struggle. So there is no political sustainable struggle that can ever be won by lawyers. It's just impossible. You know. So that's why I say the best bet is never to go through the lawyers, is building sustainable communities that can withstand pressure, including from the people that claim to represent them. Most of which, certainly in the Eastern Cape where I come from, has been the ANC betrayal after betrayal. Now then, the issue about the wording of socioeconomic rights, look, I know this was a big controversial topic, but I think the judges have moved on. I think there are instances where they are now asking more exacting questions. You know, at the beginning of the sort of constitutional experiment, the judges took the view that we could trust the government to do the right thing. You know, Mandela has just been elected. Okay, let's give him a couple of years. If people are demanding too much, they will collapse the government. But I think that patience has worn off. The judges are now asking exactly, don't tell us you are going to deliver HIV medication. Give us the plan with specifics. And if you already have the plan, tell us why you are not able to do it. So I think the pendulum is swinging. Judges are becoming more and more suspect, I would say, of government explanations, because we've had experiences of completely dishonest administrations. So I don't think the wording of the Constitution really is a big problem these days, because that wording has also moved on, which comes back to another thing. I think it's the gentleman in the front who spoke about, Obra Steve, who was speaking about the Freedom Charter being a living document. You know? So even the Constitution has evolved, you know, it's still living. No, I think it was Judicial was saying it's still living, so it's answering today's problems, you know. And so the same has happened to the Constitution. You are no longer really stuck to the wording as it was then. You're looking at today's interpretation to resolve today's challenges. Now, oh yes, this gentleman, you know, this is a very big question you are asking about whether or not society still believes in the Bill of Rights. You know, it really always depends on who you are asking. You know, if someone is arrested, right, and they're falsely accused of a crime, murder, a big crime, you know, but you've got a perfect defense and alibi. You know, I was in Johannesburg at the time the murder took place, and the murder took place in Lusikisik, right? But it's a horrific murder. There was rape before, then there was torture, and then there was a murder. Yeah, and then they slit the tongue and whatever. It's a horrific murder. You know what happens? The community goes to the court, and they say no bail. No bail, right? But you're sitting there wondering what on earth has happened. I was really in Johannesburg. The only thing that stands between you and maybe lynching or incarceration, you know, it's actually law. You know, so this is the problem with community. We go like this, you know. What do they call Zuma? Called the meanders. You know, we go like this, you know. But what is unmistakable and never changes is the law. You know, so I think that if we always give in to like community pressures at a particular given time, we don't deserve to have a constitution. And the reason we need to have a stable constitution is so that when society is over its anger, they still have a place to rebound to, which is this, the law then serves as this conscience of the nation. It serves as this truth teller, you know. It serves as this thing that tells us things we don't want to hear, you know. So we don't want to hear that you are innocent because we're looking for someone to blame, something horrific has happened. So don't tell us that this man is innocent. Don't tell us that he is presumed innocent. In our eyes, he's guilty. You know. Now you see this when it's you who's an accused. You don't see it when it's someone else who's an accused. You see it when it's your sister who's an accused or when it's your brother who's an accused. You see. But we as lawyers, we see it all the time. And that's why people wonder, why on earth are these people representing the criminals? No, they're not criminals, they're accused. You know. So yes, Arthur Charles Colson, I know it's the second time I'm invoking his memory, but he was really the greatest jurist that this country ever produced. Arthur Charles Colson said that you cannot interpret the Bill of Rights through the passions of the public. That's still true even now. You have to interpret it through some clarity of thought, not through the passions of the mob. And so, do we want the right to kill other people? Right? Maybe many people will say we do, until you are the one who's an accused. You say, but I'm innocent. You know. So yes, I don't think the Bill of Rights is even a topic for debate. I think it's beyond any contestation. And I don't see any serious pressure from the public saying get rid of the Bill of Rights. What I do see is that the public is saying implement the Bill of Rights. Get on with it. The Bill of Rights says there will be houses for all. Where are they? You know, the Bill of Rights says the land will be shared. Where is the land? You know, the Bill of Rights says that there will be equality before the law. Where is the equality? So those are the demands I see that are relevant, is that the masses are saying, implement this Bill of Rights you've been waiting for 30 years.
I wanted to ask the final question. If the Constitution, the Freedom Charter became the Constitution, the economic aspects, which were the center of CODESA disagreements, nationalization, in the main. There's debates about free education, but I think in its radical interpretation, in the minds of the people, the doors of learning meant there won't be a restriction to me getting an education because of fees. That's not covered in the Constitution, am I right?
No, it's not covered. That's further education, and there is no unqualified right to further education. There is an unqualified right to basic education. Yes, so you're right.
Yeah, and there's no nationalization.
No, there is no clause that says that the sort of commanding heights of the economy shall be publicly owned. That's allowed by the government. I mean, the government has already nationalized
is there in the
minerals.
Constitution, as it stands, a restriction to nationalize?
No, you can pass legislation. I mean, they passed legislation to nationalize minerals, and the Constitutional Court said that was lawful.
All right. And final one, I've got Benedict Piri, Advocate Mtunzi Mahaga, Abigail Ngobeni, and Dr.
Maga, man. Hey,
Maga. My apologies with that. And Dr. Mbahare Kekana. Again, I apologize if I'm butchering these names. I'm going to request the advocate to not retreat from ZK Matthews. I'm prepared to accept maybe ZK was an elite, he was a professor and all of that, but it was his idea that there should be a Freedom Charter. That's different from saying the ideas in the Freedom Charter are his. That's let's gather people and let's have, it's like Karl Marx can't say it was his idea for there to be a communist manifesto. But he was asked by a gathering that you go prepare a manifesto. I don't think they applied any changes, as I know, Engels and Marx's draft was adopted. But with ZK, it's the opposite. ZK said, isn't it time? And I think that's important historical fact that we cannot deny. We can say that and as well say the rural and working class masses then sent representatives and their demands were expressed in the final. Very important. Benedict Piri.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Benedict Piri. Thank you very much for the platform and the conversation, Doctor and Advocate Nokaitobi SC. My sort of summation, listening to you, Advocate, is that the reason why constitutionalism appears more palatable than parliamentarism is because of the form of republicanism or Republican politics that is really the form of democracy nowadays. And I think the reason for that is really a loss of mandate. The republicanism is an indication of the fact that people in political spaces such as parliament have actually lost the mandate from the direct masses that would then, if it was a direct system. Now, the same question rears its head even in the context of a court, which operates within the context of constitutionalism, because ultimately, those 11 judges at the Supreme Court of, at the Constitutional Court, 5 at the Supreme Court of Appeal, when they make those decisions, yes, in as much as the matter comes, you gave the example of Kolobeni and, it's baked in a grassroots, and you can say that it's got the force of a mandate of the people whose interests are represented in that particular instance. But there is still a danger that those judges apply the law in a manner that may be akin to a parliamentary system, in the sense that the hearkening is to the Constitution and its interpretation. And that interpretation sits in that particular body at that point in time, which becomes effectively supreme when considered with a parliament that may have different considerations politically, but for whatever reason, they are unable to lift them into an effective parliamentary process, so to speak. And I'm wondering,
you'd have to give an example of that.
An example of?
Of a different set of ideas that could rear their head now, that are different, for instance, to how the Constitution, as agreed by the 96 Parliament, is.
Yes.
That the judges would rely on.
Yes.
What would be an example of such a proposition?
I can make an example, for instance, and I love the example of mineral expropriation that the advocate has spoken about. We had the Mineral Petroleum Resources Development Act that radically transformed the nature of mineral economic relations in this country. That particular decision could have sat at the Constitutional Court in another way. A community could have taken on Samanco mining, for instance, with respect to how their mining rights are administered by the government, and you could have had an opening up, a transformative opening up of that space, whereas Parliament could have missed it, and vice versa. And if it has taken on, for instance, if that comes out of the Constitutional Court, because the way our law works is that laws are made in Parliament, and laws are also made in the common law through courts like the Constitutional Court.
Okay.
And as those laws develop, they harden over time and not necessarily, may not necessarily reflect the will of the people in Parliament. So that's really my question.
Your question. I'm afraid I hope you got it. I don't quite think I do, but yeah. Okay. Advocate Maga.
Strangely, when I had an interview with you, you got
I
it
could
right.
say this name.
Yeah, I don't know what happened today.
It's Tembega's presence.
Yeah, you are intimidated by him. Thank you very much. I must say that I could listen to Uchola for the whole day, Utemberg. He was my SRC president at university. And he's the reason I decided to study or to enroll for pupillage, because I was admitted as an advocate in order to practice and prosecute in the High Court, but I'd never done pupillage. So people called me advocate, and I felt guilty until he motivated me and encouraged me to do pupillage, which I passed outright. Now, the gentleman next to me raised the issue of the Bill of Rights. And Uchola spoke of a scenario of murder, rape, and dismembering of a person, and the community would want that person to be convicted and sent to jail. That leads to what we called, I once wrote about it, mob injustice, vigilantism. And I think, Jola, you may need to sensitize your colleagues in the legal profession. When I say legal profession, I'm talking about professional bodies like UNADEL, BLA, Advocates for Transformation and all of that, to say, can't we partner with the prosecuting authority and SAPS when they do these awareness and outreach programs? Because the Bill of Rights then comes in. When we are there educating the public about their rights and responsibility and the criminal justice system, entirety of the criminal justice system as a whole, they blame the lawyers, we'll arrest these people, and then the lawyers get them out and all of that. But if you get lawyers full value chain of the justice system in those awareness and outreach programs, I think we can sensitize people and be preventative in our approach to dealing with crime in general. So that's a suggestion that I'm putting to him. Secondly, he spoke of republicanism and spoke of a betrayal of the Freedom Charter and the Constitution, because we don't have the elected elites taking directly mandate from the people. And my question is there a mechanism that he thinks the current government or whoever would have an appetite to address this challenge? I'm reminded of the time when a resolution was taken to disband the Scorpions, who were sitting at 92 conviction rate, Dr. Ndlozi, at the time. And members of the ANC in the NPA, in the Scorpions, were not consulted when the decision was taken. Nothing about us without us. But they are voting members of the political party that took that decision. Now, they couldn't own up to that, and they were victims of a decision of a political party that we were members of, and the governing party at the time. So I'm just saying, what he is saying, to say it has turned to republicanism, it has turned to a betrayal and selling out by the elected elites of the Constitution and the Freedom Charter. Is there a mechanism that this can be addressed? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Abigail, you might no longer have a question, but you do have something to say, and you will say it.
Thank you, Doctor, and greetings to everyone. In Tsonga, when we speak to the elders, we stand up. So my name is Abigail.
Well, we're in Houghton. When we're in Houghton, we do what people of Houghton do.
I thought I would not really have a question anymore on the basis that some of the things that I wanted to raise were kind of covered by the advocate's previous response. And perhaps to comment, I am for the rule of law. I am for the constitutional supremacy. I believe in the Constitution. And from where I'm sitting, from the Chaskasens Court to the Langa Court and to the Nobo Court, the Mohoeng, I'm not sure if I'm missing some, the Zondo and the historic Maya Court now, you'll agree with me that the challenges that we have are not the same. You talk of the initial cases that the Constitutional Court, we just celebrated 30 years now, to decide on then your state versus Mokonyane. Those are the obvious cases that have direct bearing on the Constitution. But currently, we have situations that opens the Constitution more to interpretation. I'm not sure if I'm making sense. There are cases that are in court or that have been in court more on interpretation than what is currently black and white.
Yeah.
And I was wondering on whether, and I wanted to hear the advocate's comment to say, are we in an era where it's being stretched beyond what is already there just interpretation moving forward, or it's still sustainable, or it's still standing the test of time? And he answered and said it's a living document. So that's where I wanted to
I'm sure you will have further thoughts, because it's more crisp now, in my view. Yeah. The last is Dr. Kekana.
Thank you, Doc. And
Because Dr. Kekana is coming for the second time, he will not speak for long this time.
No, I'm not gonna be.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna be for long. Just to check something with you, advocate, or your input on voting as a right and as a duty. Because countries like Australia, we know that it's a must. Brazil, it's a must that citizens must vote. But in our country, it's just a right, of which we are now experiencing the number of non-voters surpassing those who are voting. So just to address that, don't you think that we need to amend the Bill of Rights?
I didn't know this. If you do not vote in Australia, you can be arrested.
Yeah, you have to pay a fine. In Brazil, you have to pay a fine.
If you don't pay the fine, you get arrested.
You get arrested. So.
No, I didn't know this.
So so because of we are having 24 million people who are not voting. And the number looks like it's increasing.
And these elites are truly elites now.
So I just want to get your comment
your
comment on that. The last one, the issue of this terms of for all, everyone in the Bill of Rights or in the Freedom Charter. What is your view on that one? The last one, it's
no, man. You have to explain that. What's wrong with that?
Come again.
What's wrong with that? For all. Why shouldn't some things be for all, like the air?
For all.
I mean, you know, the day they can privatize oxygen completely, they're going to do that. We all have to buy some device to breathe.
Okay, let me give an example.
So whether I'm a foreigner or I'm a citizen, if I'm in the US or wherever, we must not allow a situation where breathing cannot be for all. Okay. So you have to explain, what do you mean?
Okay, let me explain.
Who's disputing for all?
No, I'm just saying, just for clarity's sake.
Yeah, but ask the question.
Okay, the question that I'm posing to advocate, it's the issue of everyone. Because it's getting misunderstood.
In what way?
In a way that, like in terms of immigration, whereby foreigners from other countries, they will sneak here illegally, and they will be saying, but we are also included. It's for everyone.
Well, but is this true? Is this?
He's challenging it in court.
Yeah, we are challenging it in court.
Aha! What's your evidence? What is your evidence? Who said that?
So basically, for the sake of time, we are saying it need to be quite to say who's legally entitled to it.
To what?
To that benefit. We are disputing
so
that.
The Action SA doesn't know what the Constitution means when it says South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. You don't know why the Constitution says that.
We are
or
saying,
the Freedom Charter.
We are saying Action SA, everyone who legally lives.
No, but you know why the Constitution said that. There's a history to that particular line, because the majority was excluded legally.
We agree on that, but we experience things have changed.
What is the problem that South Africa doesn't belong to Zimbabweans?
We are saying.
Is that what you are getting at?
The point that I want to bring is we are experiencing migration, whereby our country is under threat. Any country which cannot control its migration policies.
Are the foreigners who are illegal saying South Africa belongs to them? Did you hear this from them?
Come again?
Did you meet foreigners who are illegal saying South Africa belongs to them?
Yes.
You've got this evidence in court.
No, wait. No, the matter is sub judice. I cannot get into
That is sub judice, doesn't mean it's not public.
No, he knows advocate. The matter is sub judice.
I'm trying to understand that, because there could be a dangerous, deliberately counterintelligence operation taking place to destabilize our country. To attribute a narrative that is not there, And we then are solving problems that we actually don't have. When the 2008 xenophobic attacks happened in Alexander, we now know that it was an operation to destabilize South Africa by proper intelligence operatives of Zimbabwe. We now know that people who had been historically living there since Alexander was founded in 1905, who were not killing each other because you are Mozambican or Lesotho or what, one day woke up and started to say the others leave. But that it was actually a proper intelligence-driven program to drive Zimbabweans back to Zimbabwe because there was elections in 2008. We now know that. Where does this one come from?
All right, okay. Let me come in, Doc. This sort of contradiction. We are a country which believes in rule of law. So rule of law meaning people who are coming to the country must come in the right way. That's what we are believing in.
You are cheating us, Doc. Do you have evidence that the illegal foreign nationals in South Africa say they don't have to be legal because South Africa belongs to them?
Correct.
You have this evidence.
Videos are all over the place, whereby they are saying, we've accommodated you during the struggle. So we are owing us, we are here in this country because we also assisted you.
Okay. Tembeka is here, he has heard. This is the second intervention I don't think I comprehend. But he seems to be in a position, and we've got the last, you are the last person. So, advocate uzawuthetha, but with all respect to everybody, I'm going to also ask that Ubaba Mavuso Msimang says something as well, just to conclude as a statement of closure for our conversation. I do this because I'm very traumatized by the place of elders now in South Africa. Just generally in our communities, abantu abalingana naye, they are abandoned, they are abused, they no longer have an opinion, they must not speak. No, it's our time. And then we become like a country of a child-headed household. It's very different to saying we're equal, all of us, before the law. I hope I'm not offending your constitutional doctrine, but these are very important people who have been very critical to the very conversation, who are willing to lay their lives. Sbey and I just post 90 activists, I mean, and Tembeka, maybe a little bit, but I mean, the reality is that Bobra Steve and all of that. So I will ask Ubaba Mavuso Msimang just to, after the advocate dealt with the entire analysis, I will be giving you the third round. Okay. Do you see my predicament? Everybody is equal before me. Even Tate Mavuso is going to speak for the second time. Yeah, I am. After the advocate, Tate Mavuso is going to close. It is exactly 1,300 hours. It's never enough this time, Bro Steve. Okay. That's why we must write. Advocate.
All right. No, thank you. I'll be very brief. I think what I was saying, Mr. Piri, is yes, I mean, the first reason why we need constitutionalism, not parliamentary supremacy. Yes, so the first one, you are correct, is that parliamentary supremacy appears as a thing that's good for the masses, but it's all glitz and shine, no substance. Where the substance is really in the world of constitutional supremacy. But the second most important reason is the protection of individual rights. I just have no confidence that parliamentarians will protect our individual liberties. But I have confidence that judges will. But I also believe that parliamentarians themselves when they are faced with legal difficulties, would rather go in front of independent judges than other parliamentarians. Yeah. So that's why I don't think we can afford to tamper with this principle of constitutional supremacy, which is anchored on the Bill of Rights. After everything is said and done, the right to life is sacrosanct, but the judges will protect it, but parliamentarians may not. Then there's a second point that Umtura was raising around the issue of the gap between the elected and the electors. I think the most glaring example is the decline in voter turnout. I mean, if you look at the stats, in 1994, we were at 77%. We've now gone to 58%. That's off the registered. But if you then take of the total population that was capable of registering, that were eligible, even if they are not registered, then we're really talking about this government being elected by a tiny minority of society, which is way below 50%. And that just, questions the legitimacy of this process that we are claiming. And so we always do need to supplement democracy by a qualitative form of deliberation. And speaking for myself, if you watch a debate in the Constitutional Court about a single section going on for 3 days, right, versus in Parliament, I think you can see the qualitative nature of the deliberation, that there's just no contest. So it's...
Wait, repeat that. Sorry, I missed. I am the ears of very ordinary people in the
All
room.
right. In
so
legal
what happened in the courts?
No, in legal terms, a review of a decision, I'm making an example, could take place either because it infringes the bill